All right, you're finally on our stage. So a year and a half ago, when we were discussing whether or not we should be talking about psychedelics at an investment conference, I got in touch. Actually, I tried to hire Michael Pollan to come and speak, and I think he wanted 150 grand US to get on the stage. How to Change Your Mind was peaking. Everybody wanted a piece of this guy, and it was a little bit out of my budget at the time. However, I got in touch with Hamilton Morris, awesome videographer, Viceland, Hamilton's Pharmacopoeia, and we just had some amazing conversations about the space because I was coming at it from, say, a finance perspective and a business perspective, and Hamilton is Hamilton. He's a chemist and an adventurer. And he said, look, if you're really curious about legitimate business models in the psychedelic space, you need to get in touch with Compass Pathways. That was a year and a half ago. And then thankfully, actually it was only a couple months back, a couple friends put us in touch, a mutual acquaintance. And I think the words were, well, if we have anybody from our team in North America over your dates, they'll come to Vancouver. I didn't think you'll be the president and founder though, so I'm really glad that you're here. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, now how's your experience been at the show? First of all, this is your first time in Vancouver, obviously your first Cambridge event. You having a good time?
I love the city, nice people, great conversation so far, so it has been amazing, yeah.
Okay, and we had an awesome dinner last night. So why did you start Compass Pathways? What was the inspiration?
Yeah, so I think one point I want to make, for us it's not about commercializing psychedelics. For us it's really about changing mental health care. And we believe in a world where every human being should have the right to have a healthy mind. And so that's what we're working towards. And I think that vision comes from a deep encounter with mental health suffering amongst a group of our founders. So my two co-founders.
So you're talking personally?
Yeah. So my co-founder's son had a severe OCD and depression and was treated at Harvard. And with every bout of treatment, he got worse and worse. And so the system failed on him. Eventually, he was stabilized with ketamine, which is an off-label drug in use for depression, and then eventually he found help with psilocybin. And I had first anxiety disorder when a good friend of mine died very unexpectedly, and then I was put on SSRIs, and the SSRIs actually pushed me into depression. Then I was put on the next escalation. I took tricyclics and got worse and worse, and long story short, eventually an investor in another company that I had built introduced me to psilocybin and said, have you heard about the research? And I knew nothing about drugs, and I looked into it, and then had a very high dose, the infamous 5 dried grams. And
how did you make, back that up. How did you make that transition from having no experience or exposure to psychedelics or psychedelic medicines to jumping into a heroic dose like that?
Yeah, I think I was convinced by the good science that had been done. So I think we're going to talk to Matt later, which is exciting. And so Hopkins has done amazing work, NYU, UCLA, Imperial, and they all have shown that psychedelics in the right set and setting are safe to take. And they offer hope for some patients at least. And so I figured I was in such a dark place at that point in time that I felt that this was something to try. And for me, it worked. And so we tried to figure out for whom else will it work. And that's why we're running large-scale trials to figure out the right approach to psychedelic therapy.
So we hear that a lot, how important and significant set and setting are. For the benefit of our audience, can you explain what that means exactly?
Yeah, the set is kind of the mindset that you have going into the experience, and the setting is the environment in which you are taking the psychedelic and then undergoing the psychedelic experience, and how that is typically done in the clinical setting at the leading centers and psychedelic research is that the patient is carefully prepared for the experience. First of all, he's screened, and it's made sure that he's actually eligible into the study, and then he's prepared, and then there is a very controlled environment which resembles a living room experience in a hospital as far as that is possible, so that you put into the right mindset, and then you're supported by 2 therapists through the experience, and then coming out of the experience and hopefully having had some insights into your suffering and how to deal with that, and the patient is helped by the therapist to integrate the experience.
And this is how you are running your clinical trials today?
That is correct. So we just completed the largest controlled study with psilocybin done to date, where we dosed 89 participants. That was actually an innovative trial where we looked at simultaneous administration, where we dosed up to 6 people at the same time.
Okay.
But that was in a healthy population. And in our phase 2B trial, which we're running in North America and Europe, we are working with 2 therapists and 1 patient.
So you dosed 6 people, and you said you're working with healthy people. What does that mean?
So the regulators want to see more safety data to really understand how safe psilocybin is. We have a good understanding from tox work, and obviously we have a lot of information on recreational use. 2% of the world population have used a type of psilocybin mushroom. But we need to still generate more safety data, and we need to find a business model which is actually affordable, because one of our core objectives is to make this therapy not an elite therapy that only the few 10% of the population can afford, but the goal is to create a therapy that is accessible to anyone, and that might be foreign for the US healthcare system, but healthcare is a right in Europe, and we very much believe in that, and so we're working with payer systems in the US, in Canada, and in Europe to work out how can this therapy be delivered at a cost that's affordable, and therefore we're piloting new ways of administrating.
Could you walk us through what a clinical trial actually is like for the patient? Because at this conference we've heard a lot about data and clinical trials and studies, but what is the actual human experience for somebody going through a treatment with Compass Pathways?
Well, first of all, the patient needs to fulfill the entry criteria into the study, which for us in treatment-resistant depression means that in the current episode of depression, the patient needs to have failed 2 treatment attempts with typically that are 2 different SSRIs that are being attempted, and then the patient needs to be referred by the GP or attending psychiatrist into the trial. Once that is fulfilled, we check for certain intake criteria. So, for example, someone who suffers from schizophrenia or has borderline syndrome, etc., or any other medical condition that excludes them from the study, would mean that they cannot enter the study. If they fulfill all of the criteria, they can enter the study, and then there are different time points in which the patient interacts with a therapist. So there's always a lead therapist. The patient builds rapport with that lead therapist, is prepared for the experience, is being taught certain coping mechanisms to deal with the psychedelic experience, which can be at times challenging, and gets to know the co-therapist. And then on dosing day, the patient comes into the clinic, is welcomed by the 2 therapists, still needs to undergo blood work, and needs to fill in all the questionnaires, etc. But then receives the psilocybin dose, and then goes into the experience, which means that they are invited to lie down on a couch.
And how are you determining the dose on a per patient basis?
Well, it's standardized. So in our treatment-resistant depression trial, we're trialing 3 doses, a 1 milligram dose, which is an active placebo to manage expectancy, and then a 10 milligram dose, which is a medium dose, and then 25 milligrams of psilocybin, which is a high dose.
And that's a high dose, okay. And so post-treatment, what's the follow-up integration and counseling? Is there a program? What happens next?
So the patient then works with the lead therapist after the experience to integrate the experience, and that is on a need basis. The idea is to support the patient to the extent required by the patient, and if it requires 4 sessions or 5 sessions, that's what it takes. And if someone only needs 2 sessions, then that is the right amount for that patient.
And in your experience so far, have you seen recurring treatments required more often, and how frequent, and for how long?
And that's an excellent question, because people keep asking me, why is the pharmaceutical development so expensive? And it's not only that we need to run the regulatory trials, but we need to answer exactly those questions, which, for example, 2 things that we're interested in is, are you able to keep people on their medication? Because people are really afraid to get off their SSRIs, which we have to do in our current trial. And so that is one question we need to answer, which creates a lot of variation into the study designs. And then also the question is, if somebody does not respond to the first dose of psilocybin, how often do we need to dose a person before they remit? And those are all questions that obviously the payers want to know, right? The insurances, in order to cover that, they want to know if someone gets better from a psilocybin therapy session, for how long do they get better? Do they need to come back every month? Then probably this is not a cost-effective treatment. Or is it really true that they stay out of depression for, who knows, 6 months, 12 months? Then it might be a cost-effective treatment.
Now, and I guess best case scenario, you treat a client once, you treat a patient once, and they're good, and you don't have to see them again. But that's counter to the pharma model, which is really a subscription-based business model. And so, are you seeing any pushback? Are you getting any pushback from big pharma with Compass Pathways model?
I don't think it runs counter the big pharma model. I think this is something we're always talking about, the continuous pill that you keep taking. But if we look at psychiatry, for example, most drugs are off patent. They are genericized, so big pharma doesn't really care about the sector at the moment. I think this changes now with esketamine developed by Janssen coming to market, which is also an episodic treatment. And so we don't see huge pushback from big pharma, rather cautious interest, I would say. People are getting excited because they see that there are strong signals from the studies that have been done to date. And eventually what matters is really what the payer systems think, right? If they believe that this treatment is potentially curative, then this is cost effective, because you have to count not only the cost of any other medication, but you have to think about sick leave payments, etc., and everything that goes into the equation. And depending on what country you look at, you find out that a treatment-resistantly depressed patient costs the entire system between 20 and 40,000 a year. So, if you take those people reliably out of depression, then you have a very cost-effective solution for the insurances.
Now, Compass Pathways is really the first company to commercialize this process, and you're the farthest one forward. I would say the true pioneer. You've been involved in the business since day one. What's been the most challenging part of building this company?
Excellent question. I think dealing with patients is a lot of responsibility. And so, especially in such a vulnerable state as under the influence of a strong psychedelic, and so to make sure that we guarantee patient safety and comfort all along the way, making sure that we have the same standards at all the clinical trial sites. We're working with 20 different universities in our phase 2 program to make sure that is exceeding the standards we set. That has been one of the major things we have been working on. I think we did that very successfully, but this really kept us busy.
And are my numbers right? Right now, I think you have about 216 patients going through clinical trials in Canada, the US, and the UK. Walk the business model forward. What's happening in 5 years, and what's ideally happening in 20?
Right. So we hope to complete our study by mid next year, the phase 2B study, hoping for positive results, obviously. And hoping that we have those, we will embark on a phase 3 program, which we're currently designing, which means another 2 very large trials that we're going to run again in Europe and North America, which will take another 1.5-2 years. And then hopefully after that we will file for our NDA, and then get the drug ready for rollout, which requires a lot of therapist training, a lot of working with the system as well. So we need to figure out where will all those psychedelic sessions being held, right? So we're working with mental health clinic groups. We are excited that there's a lot of entrepreneurship in the area at the moment. We're very close with MAPS that are doing an amazing job with MDMA for PTSD. We think that Janssen is thinking deeply about how to get ketamine therapy rolled out at scale. And so I think there will be a whole new paradigm in psychiatric care. And that, looking forward, I think, we really want to change how mental health care is delivered, and so I think those psychedelics have the possibility to keep people on the good side of mental health. So I think, to your question, what's my 20-year vision or my 10-year vision, and there was something that Dennis earlier said about we will see centers, and we will create an infrastructure that allows for the safe administration of psychedelic substances. And we will create let's say, some people always refer to the shaman. We create kind of a modern shaman, right? The psychologist or psychiatrist who's able to deliver those substances in a safe way. And so we will have that infrastructure, and maybe at some point in time these substances will be used more like a mental health vaccine, which keeps people out of mental health suffering.
Now, is there a place for the traditional use of psychedelic plant medicines, a more ceremonial or ancestral experience?
I hope so. So I think that is, we're all for that, and I think it's ridiculous that drugs are prosecuted in the ways that they are. I think, I'm all for the decriminalization. I think no one should go to jail for using a psychedelic, or for that matter, any drug really. I think we need to be careful with legalization, because those drugs are very potent, and they need to be given in the right setting, as I said, and I think we need to standardize that and guarantee patient safety first. Having said that, we are all about patients, so we're not getting actively involved in any of the activism. But I don't think that runs counter, right? I think people can have traditional experiences in shamanic settings, and I think we need to think about the average person that hasn't even heard about psychedelic substances, that has been depressed for 20 years, so the people that realistically go through our trials. Would they hop on a plane and go down to the Amazon to take ayahuasca? No, they would not. They would only do something that their attending GP prescribes to them, and so we're fighting for those patients for access.
Awesome. And so, are the plans then in the future? You talked about a lot of other organizations that are working with other compounds. Are you going to stick to psilocybin? Are you going to diversify your studies? Where are you headed?
Yeah, I think you spoke about Hamilton, who I'm going to see for breakfast tomorrow morning, and he has I think a very healthy point of view. I think psilocybin is an amazing drug in that it's very much de-risked, so we know that it's very safe and it's very much advanced, and that's why we're focusing on it, because our goal is patient access, and we believe this is the fastest way to take such a compound to patients, and we believe it's a very strong antidepressant. Is it perfect? Probably not, right? There might be something better out there, and so we're very much engaged in that. We have a very large preclinical program that we're running. We want to understand the biological underpinnings of psychedelics. There's still a lot to be learned. We don't have full understanding of all the receptors that are implicated, of the downstream cascades. We don't understand the epigenetic switches. So there's a lot to be learned, and I think once we have a better understanding of the mechanism of action, we can develop novel compounds. We already have that, might be then I heard somebody talk about the second or third generation. I think, it's we're still working on the second generation. I think that's the realistic one, and for anyone looking at investing in this space, I think we need to be realistic. Any new compound we develop today is still, 5 to 7 years away from patients, because we still need to generate the preclinical evidence, and then the patient studies run for another 7 to 8 years. So anything new we develop right now is still, in the best case, let's say 10 years away from patients in the real world, or 15 years. So that's why we said, let's focus on psilocybin first and other innovation in mental health. So we're not only about psychedelics, we're looking at other treatment modalities that we believe provide real solutions for patients.
Okay, and now are you publishing the results of your trials somewhere publicly where we can read?
Yeah, everything. So I think there's this Open Science Manifesto that we have been attacked for not signing. I believe it's an anti-capitalism manifesto, not an open science manifesto, because open science is about publishing whatever you find. And so we're very committed to publishing anything we find. The first one will be our cognition trial that we just completed. The results should be out by December. So that will be the first major trial that we will publicize. And then there's a lot of work we're doing currently in preclinical models that will be very exciting news next year. So everything we find will be published.